Hello and welcome to the Ohio Arts Council's Rife Gallery. Today you've joined us for the Artist Talk by Kimberly Chapman as a part of the All We Cannot Forget exhibition curated by Shar Norman. Folks, you are all in the listen-only mode, so if you have questions, feel free to pop them into the chat and we'll get to them at the end of the talk. All right, that is it. Welcome, Kim.
Thank you. I really wanted to thank you, Kat, and your staff, as well as the Ohio Arts Council. This is a great opportunity, and it's really been a pleasure working with you and working with Shar Norman as well, and being part of this exhibition. So thank you. Okay, well, the artist talk. I think the best place to start is with childhood. And I have to tell you, like probably many Ohioans, childhood in Ohio was great. We just ran from one backyard to another. I was an art lover. You can see my horse that I rescued, my rabbits, my dog. What you don't see are the string of hamsters named Snoopy. I am fortunate to have a wonderful family. On the left slide is an older photo of my husband, now of 40 years, our daughters and our son, a recent wedding on the right of our son's wedding in Denver to his new wife, Katie, and then the four hooligans at the bottom are our grandsons. And yes, they are more than a handful and only live 5 minutes away. I'm very fortunate to have a brother and a sister, as you can see on the upper left. My parents were absolutely phenomenal people. My dad was an artist. And on the far right is my grandma Elsie, who came here from England after her family died of tuberculosis. And she and I were incredibly close. And she lived till her 99th year. I did not come to be an artist from a young age. In fact, my undergraduate and graduate degrees are in marketing. And I spent 30 years working for corporations and colleges as their marketing director. First for Little Tykes, the Rubbermaid toy subsidiary, also for Matrix Essentials, the hair and skincare company. And the photo at the bottom was my last professional position. Not that being an artist isn't professional, but my last working position at a college, and that was at an all-women's college titled Ursuline College. So going back to school in your mid-50s, very interesting. My children were actually older than my fellow students. I have to tell you, my experience at the Cleveland Institute of Art was absolutely fabulous. And every day was just incredible. The students were very respectful, so talented and fearless. My instructors were brilliant. It was just such a great opportunity, such a luxury to be able to do this. And these are just some of the projects and things that we did at CIA. I'm going to talk a little bit more about CIA because I wouldn't be the artist I am today without my CIA education. At TAP, we had 24 hours as a senior to mount a defense. That was my area. The middle photo, it takes a village, are different faculty members and students that came to my defense. Usually there's about 50 to 100 people. And at the bottom, I was one of the most important and memorable days of my life. I was one of 6 people, students as a graduating senior, to receive the Agus Gunn Traveling Scholarship Award. And that sure was a special day in my life. So I took that award, that traveling award, and I decided to go to England. I specifically went to London to see the sculpture that you see on the left-hand side. That is a sculpture called 399 Days by the British artist Rachel Kneebone. And it is an incredible piece, and it's all about humanity. And it was placed in the Victoria and Albert Museum in the medieval galleries. And I thought, I have to see that for myself. How special to have your work placed alongside masterpieces from the medieval ages. And I went with my girlfriend in the middle, that's Victoria, my partner in crime. And it was so great to see the wonderful pots of, oh my God, now his name's gonna escape me. It'll come great, Oh my God, I can't think of it. I'll get back to you on that later, but it was exciting to see them nonetheless. Also did studio visits with really wonderful potters. And that's my cousin who lives outside of London, who I never had the opportunity to meet, even though we were childhood pen pals. This was the series that came from that traveling scholarship experience. And I couldn't help but look at these ancient neighborhoods and buildings in London. And it's kind of where the kernel of what women endure came to me, and how hard it was for women during Victorian times. And each one of these sculptures tells that story. And they're porcelain sculptures that are made from slabs. And then I use photolithography, which is a process to take found images and transport them onto the surface of the clay. Here's a detail. If you look closely at the photo on the left, it's actually a woman who's hanging herself. She's in such despair, and she has kicked the chair off to the bottom left to ensure her success at her endeavor. And you'll see gold lustered flames on the right. Um, and that is really just to show the intensity of what she was feeling at the time. There's so many people that have inspired me to become an artist. And one of them is Chris Adaman. And she is an artist that was able to go to the Misan porcelain factory, use their molds, and team with their people to create a whole new narrative as to what these figures would mean. Originally, they were kind of staunchy, stuffy figures. She creates these crazy dioramas of people with a hint of erotica. And I just thought, wow, that is just so clever. I want to do something like that. Cindy Sherman, the feminist photographer, has always been a favorite of mine. I love how she transformed herself as being many different women, because she felt that women had to be the housewife, and they had to be, the daughter, the caretaker, the nurse, the doctor, everybody all rolled into one. And I thought that was just incredible what she had done. And on the left side, where you see the two black and white photos, she's playing both nurse and doctor. And I just thought that was so clever. Here's some significant other people that have inspired me. David Bowie is on the bottom right. In high school, I was such a fan of his artistic endeavors, his music, his clothing, everything about him. I was just crazy for him. And I had the walls of my bedroom covered with David Bowie pictures from floor to ceiling, wall to wall. The other favorite on here is Kiki Smith. That little girl in the bottom left-hand corner is her work. And it's why I'm called Kiki instead of Grandma to my 4 grandsons. So my work starts with research. Sometimes I spend up to 6 months, 9 months researching a topic before I do the first sculpture. And that's just something that I like to do. I read a lot of books, I read a lot of articles, both scholarly and just in the popular media. And this was the kernel, the beginning of a series that I've done called 86 Reasons for Asylum Admission. It started with research. And not only do I research just online and reading articles and books, I also like to do field research. So I have visited various asylums in America, and this particular page is showing the Buffalo Lunatic Asylum, where I hired this wonderful young man who's a historian for the architectural center that is doing the redevelopment. And I just loved going through. I think we were 4 hours on our first tour, and he was so knowledgeable, and I just loved seeing everything. It's a humbling, sorrowful, and amazing experience to be able to go into these massive asylums that were built in the mid 1850s and see what they actually look like. The last trip, and I've done several to Buffalo, I decided to take some porcelain clay along with me and started doing impressions from the building. And that was a lot of fun. The upper right image is showing all the goodies that I was able to collect. I document everything. And I highly recommend this because it becomes a treasure trove of ideas for the future. If I lived 10 lives, I wouldn't be able to mine all the ideas and thoughts that have come to me and turn them into artworks. There just isn't enough time. I won't live long enough. This is what a typical spread in the journal looks like. This happens to be a project I was working on with suitcases, and I was creating emblems that would go on the exterior of the suitcases that would be part of the secret men's society that sent their wives to asylums. So very detailed. This is another asylum in Athens, Ohio. I find it important to be able to show work where the very brick and mortar of the building speaks to the narrative of the art. So here in the bottom right, I have a sculpture in one of the larger tintypes from the collection with a placard that says, to see the entire collection, 2 miles away, you can see the entire collection at the Southeast Ohio History Center, and you can see the collection paired with actual artifacts from the asylum. I wanted to take a minute to talk about how materials matter. This was something that was drilled into us at the Cleveland Institute of Art. Choose a material that is important to you that allows you to best tell your story. And for me, it was clay. And the Laguna Clay Company makes the whitest porcelain that I can find here in America. On the upper left, that tiny little pot was the pot that Marco Polo brought back from China to Europe that made emperors, kings, and queens and empresses crazy for porcelain. And it took 500 years to unlock the secret of how to make porcelain. It was actually so important that it was called yellow gold. I'm sorry, white gold. I'm looking at the yellow bars of gold. Edmund Duval, his book on the lower left, is, I think, more obsessed with porcelain than I am. And he's written several books, and this is the one that he wrote most recently about porcelain and its history, starting in China and going from there. Quite an interesting read. There's a high price to be paid for porcelain. It's so beautiful and it's so luminous. And if you stretch it extremely thin, you can actually see through it like a bone china teacup. It's so beautiful. It's so smooth. It's just an amazing material. But on the flip side, it is the most persnickety clay body on the planet. It wants to crack more, dry slower, and needs to be fired at the highest temperature of any clay body. So when you get a piece out of the kiln, if you're doing a gold luster firing, the third time you get it out of the kiln, if it makes it, you're pretty happy. I always say it's like Christmas morning every time I open the kiln. As far as making, my process is very intuitive. Sometimes I don't know exactly what I'm going to make. When I'm making it, it turns into something on its own. But I oftentimes will use molds that I've made or purchased, and I use those molds in unusual ways. And I also use slabs of clay. So I combine the two. And then my new love is to dip white cotton sheets or those heavy blue paper towels into liquid clay, which is slip, and start doing some wrappings with them. And that has really allowed me to take my work a lot further. This is just an example of a process where I'm using a slab sculpture to create the breastplate and helmet. And then I'm taking parts of certain molds and making the decorative elements. If you look on the bottom left on the helmet, the decorative work around that helmet is nothing more than just adding wet clay, using a pointed wooden tool, and just kind of zigzagging through it. It's just so fun. I mean, porcelain is just the best. This is another process shot. This is Eugenia Martinez, and I did pretty much the same type structure. Her body was a slab. Her cake riser is also a slab, but all the decorative elements came from just adding soft clay with that same wooden tool and just starting to play with it. that gives her her decorative ornaments on her dress. So all my work deals about what women endure. And unfortunately, it's an endless litany of topics. I tried to separate these topics into various themes. And I've been talking to you a little bit about 86 Reasons for Asylum Admission. That's the first photo on the far left. Easy Prey is another series of work because I do work in series. And it's all about how women are easy prey for men and how men can be predators. The next one, the gal with the fur cap, is part of a series that has to do with women living on the fringes of society. She actually was a circus trainer for P.T. Barnum and one of the most successful trainers in the world, and certainly the first female trainer. The other two photos that you see, the one with the three little children with masks on, are part of a series of 12. And that has all to do about American school shootings. And to the far right, the masked figure is part of a series called Hush that all has to do about scold's bridles in Europe and how men could order women to wear these heavy iron bridles to help get them to stop talking and to obey them. So back to 86 Reasons for Asylum Admission. This is the list that pulled up when I first started researching, and it was reasons for admission from the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum in Weston, West Virginia. Now that's a mouthful, but it's a terrific trip if you can make it. You can do all kinds of tours. And when I started reading closely some of these reasons, like woman trouble, overstudy of religion, overaction of the mind, I got really, really angry and thought, I have to do something about this. And I started talking to my daughters, and they really didn't know the asylum story and what part in history that was comprised of, and how asylums came on the forefront of America and when. So I thought this is something I could do. I could make sculpture that has to do with the asylum from a female point of view and tell the story. And that to me is as important as making the work, is having opportunities to talk and lecture about what it means to be a female in an asylum from 1850 to the late 1900s. This is Thomas Story Kirkbride. He was a psychiatrist who believed in the Kirkbride approach to building these asylums. They were massive. They were completely self-contained towns with their own dairy barns, their own everything, laundry, growing food, everything took place on the asylum grounds, which were often thousands of acres, and they were beautiful. And he wanted the best for patients. He wanted these asylums to be full of light, fresh air, beautiful grounds. So his book that you see on the left is all the rules for creating a Thomas Kirkbride approach asylum. So that's basically what I've been zeroing in on, are the Kirkbride asylums. And the woman in the upper right-hand corner, that is Dorothea Dix. And she worked with Thomas Kirkbride, and she was a huge advocate for the mentally ill. These three sculptures were the very first ones I did for the series, and there's about 45 sculptures in the exhibition. And these are the gold masked women. I thought once these women are put in these asylums, whether they were mentally ill or not, as time went on, pretty soon they would lose their ability to talk, to think, and to see. And even if that is metaphorically, I thought it was important to show that. So they are made in the exact way that I mentioned earlier. I'm using both molds. I'm using a slab core, and I'm using those dipped paper towels in the liquid porcelain slip. So as unique as you are, I came about this through the picture on the bottom right-hand corner of an actual toothbrush cabinet in a real asylum. And this was during COVID, when we were washing our groceries practically. We were so freaked out by germs. And I saw how some of the toothbrushes were stacked on top of each other, how close they were to each other. And I thought, oh my goodness, I don't think these toothbrushes have ever been changed out. I think the American Dental Association says every 3 months or something we should get a new toothbrush. I don't think they ever did. And it's called As Unique as You Are because even though the toothbrush handles are all identical and they're all stamped with a number, there's 88, the brushing patterns are different, just how my toothbrush would look different from your toothbrush. Sometimes another approach for me is to take an iconic piece of art that I'm just in love with and think to myself, how can I make something like that? Not like that, but what would my own version of that look like? And that's how T for Two came about. Merritt Oppenheim's object, that is actually what it's called in the bottom right-hand corner, her furry tea service, was just of such interest to me. And with tea being the national beverage in England, and with England having the first asylum ever built, which was the St. Bethlehem Asylum, well, I guess originally in London, now it's outside of London. It moved several times. I thought I got to do something with teacups and tea. And this is what came out of it. I was using molds in a very unusual way. It was a single mold for a teacup. And usually when you use a mold, you get rid of all that excess clay around the object. But I wanted to keep it, as well as the registration marks for the mold, because I thought these women broke the mold with their unruly behavior or being too outspoken or being too religious or fighting for what they believed in. So that's how this piece was born. As I learned about the diagnosis and treatments of women in these asylums, I couldn't help but think I need to come up with some championship cup trophies to male medical misogyny. Of course, all the doctors were male. And I got the idea from Robert Arneson, who's a funk artist, or was a funk artist in California. And that's his trophy down below. And he did a series of trophies for bad behavior. And I thought, that's it. I have to do my series for doctors that came up with such crazy ideas that hurt so many women. The one in the middle is Dr. Henry Cotton. And Dr. Cotton was an American doctor, and he believed that if someone's tooth was infected, that infection could lead to the brain. It's the sepsis theory. He wasn't entirely wrong, but I think what happened is he went too far. And he pulled over 10,000 teeth from unwilling victims in the asylums, mainly women. And if that didn't help them, then he would move on down through the body and take other organs as well. So I don't think he cured anyone with that. The man on the left is Hugh Diamond. Hugh Diamond is from England. He was a big camera buff, and he decided he was going to start taking photos of the women as they came into his asylum, and then he was going to base their diagnosis and treatment on their facial features. Imagine that. The fellow on the far right is Agus Muntz. He is a Portuguese doctor who created the transorbital lobotomy, and we all know how that ended. This is the flip side of the trophies. The bases actually are photographs from either the books that they wrote or their patients. Just how you can get benched in sports and you hope to get back in, men can bench women as well. And this series was born from that premise. So these women, and there's 6 of them, are actually benched while the husband or the boyfriend decides if he can find something better. And it's not always the man, but it's oftentimes the man that does this to a woman. And this series just talks about that whole thing. And the gal on the far left, in the left photo, far left, is Bubblehead. And that's Atalanta with her pet squirrel. And then Don't Call Me Cupcake is the gal with the cupcake liner on her head. And she is wearing a necklace of teeth. Again, heralding back to Henry Cotton and his teeth pulling stunts. So what's really interesting is when you create something based on certain people and then a new book comes out that is about the people that you have already created your artwork on. And that's what happened here. A new book called Night Watch by Jane Ann Phillips talks about the asylum at the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum, and talks about a woman from wartime, from the American Civil War, who was raped repeatedly while her husband was off to war, became pregnant, and then had a little girl in the asylum. When you visit the asylum, you can actually still see the room that the little girl was born in and raised in. She didn't live very long, but people are still taking gifts in honor of her to that room, candy, small gifts. So it's interesting to see that connection with the book. I had a friend who said, I'm really enjoying your work, but where's the Kim Chapman in it? Like, all you do is tell stories about other people. Like, how you should think about how to incorporate yourself more into your work. And that was a shock. I thought I was kind of doing that, but she was right. And I started thinking about my buddy Cindy Sherman, and I thought I'm going to do a series of kind of performance art photographs. And I borrowed a series of outfits from a historic fashion museum. They allowed me to bring them home. It was quite an experience. They were just so beautiful. And I had a friend of mine using, for these large blow-ups, we just used my cell phone and we used a tintype app. And she took over 100 photos in one afternoon. These were all taken in my home or outside my home. I wanted, after studying what some of these photos look like of the women who were being admitted to the asylum, or women on the streets that were headed to the asylum, what did they look like? How did they dress? And these are our 12 favorite that came out of that series. And the series that I did with my friend was in preparation for hiring this young man, Paul Lender. You see a photo of him and his camera, which is a camera exactly like the kind made in the mid 1800s. He came in and did the actual tintypes. We transferred my studio into a photography studio. And I learned that it takes 30 minutes to process one tintype, and you do not receive any negatives, so you only get one, and the largest they can go is 8 by 10. So what's next? I am looking at all kinds of different things. I read somewhere that a true artist should be able to be versed in several different mediums, and that never occurred to me. So now I'm into trying new mediums, but I want to make sure that most of these new mediums include a ceramic component, because porcelain really is my love. I keep trying to move on to other topics, but the asylum story is so rich, it just keeps pulling me in. And so I'm exploring new subject matter within the asylum umbrella. And I'm trying to dig deeper and find out more. This is an example of getting away from porcelain. When I was at one of the asylums, I asked if I could, if you don't ask, you'll never get it, right? So I just thought, I'm going to ask if I could have one of these wheelchairs from the asylum, because, I knew they were going to get rid of them all and they were just piled up in a wreck. And I'll be darned if you didn't help me put one in the back of our car. And on the back of this final seat, it says property of Elva Whitwell, I believe. And I had to believe this is probably the only thing that belonged to her during her time in the asylum. And it's a very loaded artifact. It has not been shown anywhere yet. I have two shows next year with the entirety of the 86 Reason collection, one in Michigan and one in New York. And I'm hoping to be able to put this on like a 6-inch riser and show it. Because to me, that wheelchair says someone's been dumped. And where have they been dumped? They've been dumped in an asylum. So we'll see how that goes. But this is an example of me moving away from porcelain. I was so taken with the idea of a gold standard of an asylum. I mean, the asylum started out with the best intentions, and then through overcrowding and understaffing and loss of funding, it turned into a real mess. So how would I be able to show the gold standard of an asylum? So I started working with acrylic paint and all kinds of additives, crazy things. And then I started adding my own things like pieces of porcelain, hair, and a lot of different paint chips from the asylums that I had visited. And this is the painting that has come out. I also started looking a little bit, I'm starting to look a little into more into psychology, psychiatry, and how people's brains are measured, their minds are measured. I just wanted to learn a little bit more about the medical field and what was happening in psychology in the 1800s. And I came upon phrenology, which is the study of basically the lumps and bumps in your skull can tell you if you're predisposition to being a wonderful, kind person or a murderess. And of course, the study kit contains 60 heads of men. And I thought, wow, women, they weren't even considered even to be part of a phrenology kit. So I recreated my own. And each one of them is a female with a certain part of their brain is outlined. And it would go to an imaginary guide that would tell us what that meant. Then I started thinking, gosh, I have to do suitcases because the wheelchair is a great icon for an asylum, but everybody, almost everybody, I guess, unless you were homeless, would go with a suitcase, whether she packed it or whether it was packed for her. So I started collecting these suitcases and sanding them down and priming them and painting them. It was this whole thing. And then thought, how do I create ceramic components to it? Well, I wanted to do an emblem, a little bit different one for each suitcase. There's a series of 5 or 6. And the emblem would be part of that secret men's society that I mentioned before. And every little thing that you see has a background story. I could just do a presentation just on the carriers, I think. The luggage tags are going to tell us which asylum she was incarcerated at, her name, and then the years of incarceration. I just came across this book. It's fairly new. It's called The Women They Could Not Silence. This book was so exciting to me because it's actually done in the voice of the women who spent time in asylums. Usually you're reading medical reports or you're reading what the men say about the women in the asylums. This is a book that contains dozens and dozens of stories about women in asylums. So each of the suitcases relate to real people. And the thing that was so interesting to me about the women in that book is that so many of them came out of the asylums and started campaigning for reforms for more rights in the asylums, better conditions, not having your children taken away indefinitely, even when you return, being able to maintain your property while you're in an asylum when you come out. And they were selling these cautionary tales on the streets for like a nickel a pamphlet. They weren't broken. I mean, they went on to warn other women what could happen to them. And I just found that so inspiring. So I included the hair because I wanted to show different ethnicities. I wanted to show different ages. And it almost looks like they're trapped inside the suitcase. These have not been shown yet. I'm still debating where to show them. I love the idea of showing them in some type of train station or bus station or airport. Spent the summer working with resin, and boy, is that a learning curve to try and do it right. And I'm including my artifacts from my asylum trips, along with ceramic pieces, both porcelain and a much heavier clay that's wood fired to tell the story. I've always been interested in reliquaries, religious reliquaries, which are the beautiful containers that hold the relic of a saint within. And I thought, what if mine are invisible? because you see in the middle here an actual reliquary. They were so beautiful that people would do pilgrimages to these churches that had reliquaries, and the boxes were so beautiful they forgot about the importance of the relic inside. So my idea was to create reliquaries that were see-through, so all you can see are the relics that are inside. And I'm up to almost 86 reliquaries. You can see in the bottom right how they're starting to look like totems. At the top left is my rudimentary drawing. I'm terrible at drawing. And then to the right is a fellow Cleveland Institute of Art student, or graduate, I should say, who's helping me create these beautiful cases for them made out of steel that will be white power coated. And they terminate with kind of the feeling of a Gothic arch. Down below in gold, you see a religious triptych. And so I decided to do three. The one in the center will be the largest. So we'll see how those come out. I think these are going to be done before the holidays. So I'm pretty excited about that. So after I make the work, it doesn't, as all artists know, it doesn't start there. It doesn't stop then. It really starts all over again. But I like to do these write-ups because they help me so much about each object, so that I have a reference book that tells me the materials used, the measurements, the research. And then, like everyone else, I post on social media. I try and write and place articles in art magazines. I enter a ton of shows. And I have ways of staying organized for that too. And I try and stay connected with other artists and people. And then I continue with those ideation books that I showed you earlier. This is an example of the write-ups. So each object will have a one-page write-up for easy reference. And I can't tell you how many times I look back at these for entering shows and also for doing docent-led tours of the work. This is just an example of all the different ways I've been posting on social media, whether I'm doing a talk or installing something, or just made something that's in progress. And then I was generally just a Facebook user, and then I'm realizing that so many people are using Instagram. So I decided to get onto Instagram. And the easiest way to start posting regularly for me was that I had 86 days before the first show for the 86 Reasons for Asylum Admission. And I posted about the art and the tintype photographs for 86 days in a row. And that got me started. So I think posting in a series is important if you're trying to build your audience. And I do something that probably drives people crazy. I post on multiple platforms at the same time. And I try and vary maybe the wording or the photo a little bit, but it just seems like you get more bang for the buck if you do that. This is one of two feature stories that I've authored for Ceramics Monthly magazine. This one's called Out of the White Cube. And it talks about what I mentioned before. And that is, it's so great to think about other places to show your work that most people wouldn't think of offhand. Places where, again, the building itself has something to do with the message you're trying to convey or the narrative of the art. And this is why I was in the Athens Art Museum, because that art museum is housed in the administration building of the Athens Lunatic Asylum, while I did a show also at the Dairy Barn Art Center, because it was the actual dairy barn that provided all the dairy for the patients and the staff. So I'm always looking for new creative ways to show the work. This also outlines pretty much my marketing techniques and how I approach a curator. So I think I entered 50 shows the first year I was out of school, which was about 7 years ago. And one of the ways that I'm able to keep, and I'm terrified of promising two people the same piece. So if I do these little collages of the pieces, it helps me remember what's going where. It's one thing to have a list or of the titles. It's another thing to actually see the pieces. So knock on wood, so far I haven't screwed up, but I think this is a great way to stay organized. I also think it's really important to stay connected with people. Um, on the far left and the far right are my instructors, or were my instructors at the Cleveland Institute of Art, who are very accomplished artists in their own right, Judith Solomon and Bill Brouard. I stay in contact with them. In fact, I just recently made a piece, a cuckoo clock. For the first time this happened, I made it too big for my kiln. So I'm working with Bill Brouard, who very graciously said, bring it over to me. And, I've got a couple kilns, we can fit it in one of them. So important to keep up those contacts. Down below is a show an alumni show from this past year. There's a wonderful curator from Chicago who included several of my sculptures in the work, which I was just in the exhibition, which I was just so excited about. And in the middle, up above, the Western Reserve Currents, that was about NCECA last year, and it was about showing work in exhibitions at the National Conference for Ceramic Education. It's the huge group. I mean, sometimes they get 10,000 visitors, and it goes to a different city every year. And I always thought, geez, it'd be so great to be part of that, but I'm sure that'll never happen. But sure enough, because I was connected to Northern Ohio Clay, which is a local clay organization. And because I kept up my ties with the Cleveland Institute of Art and I stayed very connected there, I was asked to include 2 sculptures. So it was very exciting for me. And finally, at the bottom right, this is a group of gals that are all Cleveland Institute of Art grads, and we created our own CIA clay group, and we're meeting here. I think this is the first meeting in my studio, and we talk to each other about our progress, whether we hit a wall, what's upcoming that's interesting. And it's just really nice to have people to be able to converse with. Finally, I continue documenting because that is my treasure trove for the future. And I think someday when I'm in an old folks home and I'm living in a 1-bedroom area and I can't have my artwork with me anymore, I'll at least have these fabulous journals, and it will help me recall what it is I was interested in and what it is I might have accomplished at one point in time in my life. And that is it. So that's the end of my talk. Thank you all the viewers especially, for being here today. I really appreciate you taking the time. I know as artists, we're all so busy, and it's really great you tuned in. And I'm going to hand the program back to Kat.
And that was really wonderful. So I want to start with you honored the journey that you've taken really well through your presentation. And folks, if you want to ask questions, pop them into the chat and I'll get to them, I promise. But back to that, you took us on a story arc. You took us through your life and helped us understand that it compounded into who you are now. So with that in mind, I would love to understand what your biggest learning from your marketing years was that you've taken into your art practice.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think I would have some of the success that I'm having now without it. I do believe, and I tell my children this and other young people, that whatever you're doing now, somehow that's going to carry on into your future and help you. It's one step to the next, to the next, to the next. So value what you're doing now and know that it will help you later. The marketing was big for me because I guess it took the fear factor out of the equation for approaching curators, museums, university galleries. It just was no longer an issue. And I think that that's important, that you have to be able to do it right. And I know how to approach people correctly because I did it in my marketing years. I knew that good photography mattered, good writing matters, constant contact matters, creating a group of people even back then in the marketing arena. I remember being in PRSA, Public Relations Society of America, the Ad Club, all those things. I think the idea of being part of organizations is important because they're bigger than you are, and they're going to introduce you to a lot of new people that you would not have met otherwise. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I have one more from a colleague. Since you read a lot about women who were institutionalized, is there a specific woman whose story has stuck with you and why?
Hmm. Gosh, there's so many. It would be like picking a favorite child, I think. But as far as a woman that has stuck with me, I think it might be Dorothea Dix, the woman that was, yeah, the woman that was shown in the presentation a little bit earlier. There's actually a portrait of her in Washington at the National Portrait Gallery. And she was doing things that most women weren't doing. She was aggressive. She was hard work, really hardworking, laser focused on helping the mentally ill. And she reached out to all kinds of organizations and she didn't quit till she saw some type of success. And she worked very closely with Thomas Kirkbride. How many women were doing that back then? How many women are even doing that now? I mean, what an incredible story that she has.
Absolutely. That's great. So I have a question from an audience member. Mark has asked, and I'm not sure, I wonder if this is actually pointing towards women of fiction. He says, I'm wondering if Kim has explored images of quote unquote mad women in 19th century American and English writers like Charlotte Bronte, Jane Eyre, or Emily Dickinson. There's a 1979 pioneering work of feminist literary history called The Mad Woman in the Attic, which discusses them.
I have read The Mad Woman in the Attic. I tend to read more contemporary novels, but I love the idea of hearkening back, putting the scholarly papers aside and popular media articles aside, like from the Huntington Post, and reading some of the old classics. So thank you. I will take those titles, and if I have not read them, I will certainly will be.
Right. Thank you, Kim. So, Kim, another thing that I think I like to ask each ceramic artist that comes uh, to give an artist talk, something that's incredibly important, and you touched on uh, is the issue of community and making sure that you have really quality community. You do that as a matter of who you are. Like uh, we got to know each other because I juried a piece of yours in back in 2020, and you took the time to reach out and say, I'd love to chat more. Um, so yes, you do absolutely comprehend the way that you build relationship, meaningful relationship and community. But there's something nascent to the clay community that builds unique community. And I'm curious if you would be willing to chat about your thoughts on that.
Yes. So the clay community, I don't think there's a more what laid back, caring, fun community than the clay community. I have never met a clay artist that I didn't really like. Um, yeah, I think I don't know what other ceramic regional I guess groups there are, but if you're in Cincinnati or wherever you are, I'm sure there's a local clay group. I would highly recommend joining it. I would also highly recommend staying in touch with your alma mater and staying in touch with other students that have graduated that you were in school with. I think that they can be a great resource for you as well as your professors. I think the most important thing is to not be afraid to approach people and say, hey, I'm a ceramic artist and I like your work. Can we meet for coffee? Why not? The photolithography that you saw in some of the work was me noticing on somebody's website that she was doing photolithography. Her name's Lynn Lofton. She's in the Northern Ohio Clay Group, and she's a fellow CIA alum. I just contacted her out of the blue. I sent her an email and said, hey, I don't know if you like tuna fish salad, but would you be willing to come over here to my studio if I feed you lunch and show me your process? And she said, sure. And here it turned out she only lived about 10 minutes away. And we've been dear friends ever since. So reach out, question people, find common ground, and seal those relationships. You'll be all the more richer for it.
Absolutely. Um, so you shared with us that you have a few exhibitions coming up. Would you mind kind of plugging those a little bit and letting us know where folks can see your work next?
Sure. I am in the final stages of working with Central Michigan University. They have a gallery called the Babber Room, which is quite wonderful. And they're very interested in the 86 Reasons. And I think it's going to be there. They wanted it for Women's History Month, which is so exciting. I've always been trying to do something special for Women's History Month. So I think it moves there in February, and then I think they're keeping it all summer. So that'll be a nice place to see the work, as well as the University at Buffalo. I am hoping that it will be at the Anderson Gallery. I've been in contact with them for the past 6 months. They visited my studio. I visited theirs a couple times. And we're just trying to finalize some dates, I think, on that one. And I think it'll be there. And you think Buffalo, you think snow, right? But I think that's more of a fall winter for next year. And
Wonderful.
that'll probably be about a 3 or 4 month show as well. And most recently, I'm in contact with some museums in London because the very first asylum, is that St. Bethlehem Asylum. And that was in London. And I'm just dying to get back there. And I'm dying to show some of the work in some of the London museums because some of it specifically relates to that asylum.
Wonderful. So I have one last question that's more of an operational question from Claudia, who said, I've seen some Ohio Arts Council's Rife Gallery exhibitions as they travel to the Medici and Warren, and will this show travel there in the future? Unfortunately, it will not. This is a one-stop show, so if you'd like to see it, and you should see it in person, make sure you make your trip arrangements to Columbus, Ohio to see it directly across from the State House. This exhibition will be up until January 3rd, and we will be open on December 24th and December 26th, and day before New Year's, all that kind of good stuff. So, yeah, make sure you make your trip to Columbus to see it in person. Otherwise, there's a really great curators tour up as well. It'll be on our YouTube archive. Um, yeah. So, Kim, I'm going to let you, if there's anything you want to make sure that you leave with the audience before we close out today, I'll hand it to you for just a moment.
Again, thank you for coming today. I really appreciate it. I love the idea of artists thinking about their ancestors, who they are, and what's going to happen with women in the future. And just to remember that silence is oh my gosh, I had this great quote. Silence is it's the foothold of repression. So let's not be silent. Let's speak up. Let's talk about and make artwork that has to do with who we are.
Thank you so much, Kim. And thank you all for joining us for this programming for the Ohio Arts Council's Rife Gallery for this show, All We Cannot Forget, curated by Shar Norman. Thank you again, Kim, for the generosity of your time and your talent. Thank you to the governor, the legislature, and the Ohio Arts Council's board who support the Ohio Arts Council, this great space, and of course, Ohio artists. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.